Donald Trump pivots on Ukraine after his friendly meeting with Vladimir Putin. He's dropped calls for an immediate ceasefire and is now backing Russia's plan to end the war with a negotiated deal. Europe and Ukraine are worried this will mean handing over territory to Russia. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Since Donald Trump returned to the White House, Ukraine and Europe have feared he would cut a deal with Vladimir Putin. After yesterday's meeting in Alaska between the US and Russian presidents, those fears have come a big step closer to reality. President Trump went into the talks demanding a ceasefire. He's emerged backing Russia's call for a peace deal. Now, that would involve Ukraine giving up some of its territory. Ukraine's president and European leaders will now meet Trump at the White House in the coming days. In this new era of big power politics and territorial land grabs, this moment will be watched closely, particularly in our own region, where China has a stated ambition to take control of Taiwan. It comes as Australia charts a different course to the United States on the Middle East. The Prime Minister has joined his British, French and Canadian counterparts in declaring Australia will recognise a Palestinian state.
Ready to go?
A momentous shift in Middle East diplomacy.
Australia will recognise the state of Palestine.
Joining allies, the UK, Canada and France.
It's actually shameful.
After the 20-month war had left 1,200 Israelis and more than 60,000 Palestinians dead.
A two-state solution is humanity's best hope to break the cycle of violence.
It's not going to change our position.
We would never have made this decision.
And I said it directly to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The situation in Gaza has gone beyond the world's worst fears.
To have European countries and Australia march into that rabbit hole and buy this.
There can be no recognition without peace.
We can't keep waiting for the end of a peace process that has ground to a halt.
This is rewarding terrorism.
Well, we've made it very clear that Hamas has no role. It has no role to play.
Hamas can play no role.
No role.
Well, let's be very clear in recognising a Palestinian state while terrorists still control Gaza has basically rewarded terrorism.
It won't feed people and it won't stop the bombs.
And we still need to do everything that we can to ensure that aid gets into Gaza and that the starvation and the killing stops.
The debate carries on as Gaza City comes under intense strikes. Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing on with his plan to occupy Gaza City.
Israel has no choice but to finish the job and complete the defeat of Hamas.
I think he has lost the plot.
In denial about the consequences that are occurring for innocent people.
Anthony Albanese has been praised by Hamas for formally recognising a Palestinian state.
Hamas will engage in propaganda, so I won't be a cheer squad for Hamas.
The problem is that Hamas is a cheerleader for him.
Now the United States is hitting back at Australia's decision to recognise Palestine.
There's an enormous level of disappointment and some disgust.
We're a sovereign nation and he's entitled to put his views, but we're also entitled to put our views.
You've got to be kidding. Why would they be doing this, and why would they be doing it now?
We need to find a path to peace, and a path to peace is through a two-state solution.
My guest this morning is the Shadow Minister for Industrial Relations and Employment, Tim Wilson, ahead of the government's reform roundtable this week. First, let's check what's making news. And Donald Trump's shift on Ukraine is dominating headlines around the world. European leaders are pledging support for Ukraine. They have not echoed the US president's position that a peace deal is now preferable to a ceasefire. We'll cross to John Lyons in Alaska in a moment. A senior Democrat senator who's led a US congressional delegation to Australia says the Albanese government deserves more credit for its level of defence spending, but should still go further. The delegation of Republican and Democrat members of Congress met the Prime Minister in Sydney on Friday afternoon after attending the Australia-America Leadership Dialogue in Adelaide. Senator Chris Coons, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee, has told insiders Australia is spending much closer to 3% of GDP on defence once shipyards and defence infrastructure are included.
I do think that you need to be counting apples to apples. The way that our NATO allies are counting their percentage of GDP, I'm told would give Australia credit for north of 2.7 or 2.8%. So the commitments made at the NATO summit that were more in the line of 3.5 might be significantly easier for Australia to reach, given that your accounting doesn't quite give you full credit.
And that interview is on our website, the Listen app and iView. And Treasurer Jim Chalmers has been out this morning laying the groundwork for this week's Reform Roundtable. He's hoping it will produce consensus around measures that can lift Australia's productivity.
This is about the next steps. It's about building consensus. It's about building momentum.
Well, the fate of Ukraine could well be decided this week, with European leaders and the Ukrainian president set to meet Donald Trump at the White House. It follows that meeting between the US and Russian presidents yesterday in Anchorage. The ABC's America's editor John Lyons is there, and I spoke to him a short time ago. So, John, thanks for joining us. Donald Trump, we know, went into this meeting threatening all sorts of sanctions against Russia if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire. He's come out with quite a different position. What happened?
Well, David, what happened is that Vladimir Putin outfoxed Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin played Donald Trump like a Stradivarius violin. Donald Trump came here wanting the deal. And we know that Donald Trump, it's not always what the deal is. He likes to make a deal of some sort. Usually he walks out of a meeting with something. This time he walked out with nothing. He came here wanting, firstly, a ceasefire. An immediate ceasefire. His second preferred option was a conditional ceasefire, and his third option was the guarantee from Vladimir Putin that he would meet the Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky in the next few days or weeks. He wanted something to announce. That's why he spoke only for 3.5 minutes at the news conference afterwards. He took no questions. This was an emphatic defeat for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump himself said a few days ago that Vladimir Putin has fooled president after president. And every president comes to office here thinking they can tame the Russian bear. They can tame Vladimir Putin and bring Russia back into the international community. Donald Trump thought the same thing. He came here to Alaska thinking that his powers of persuasion could break through that, and he left a man who was completely defeated, and you could tell that in his demeanour. Donald Trump loves to take questions from the media, loves to engage at big press conferences. He was on the biggest stage of his life yesterday, and he walked off after 3.5 minutes.
And what's more, John, he's now saying there needs to be a peace deal rather than a ceasefire. And we know for Vladimir Putin, a peace deal is what he wants, and that means Ukraine handing over some of its territory. This is of great concern to the European leaders and, of course, to the Ukrainian president. They're now going to be rushing to the White House for a meeting in the next couple of days. What can we expect to happen there?
Well, that's right. Vladimir Putin came here wanting the war to continue, and the war is continuing. Now, what's going to happen in Washington this Monday is the European leaders and the Ukrainians are going to try to win back Donald Trump. At the moment, the real struggle, we know Russia's position. The real battle at the moment is between the Europeans, with Ukraine as well, versus Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has a pattern, if you look at his public behaviour, of going with the whatever the last person he's spoken to of influence says to him. Now, he echoed Vladimir Putin's exact point of view that until we have a peace deal, we keep fighting. The Europeans are saying, let's stop the killing and then work out the framework of a ceasefire. Now, the Europeans are going to say to Donald Trump, you cannot walk away from this. The danger is the Americans, Donald Trump will walk away from this. And what that means is the funding for NATO and Ukraine will be hit. So the Europeans are making an 11th hour bid to convince Donald Trump to win over Vladimir Putin and to force Vladimir Putin to a negotiating table. Putin does not want to sit down with Vladimir Zelensky. He doesn't think he's an equal. He doesn't think that his country, Ukraine, is a legitimate country. He does not want to give the status to Vladimir Zelensky of sitting down at a meeting with him. The Europeans want that meeting to happen.
John, it is a fascinating moment. Really appreciate your analysis there from Anchorage. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David.
Let's bring in our panel now. We're joined this morning by Jacob Greber, Clare, Armstrong and James Massola. And Clare, it was announced the other day, you're soon going to be joining us at the ABC, which we're very excited about, so congratulations.
Joining the evil empire. Congratulations.
Jacob, let me start with you to pick up on what we just heard from John there, who really cut to the chase on how Trump has come out of this meeting. It is extraordinary, though. There's a lot to say here, and there is concern in the Australian government privately too about what all of this means, the message it sends to China and so on. But it is extraordinary to see that almost deferential approach Trump has towards Putin, riding together in the beast in his vehicle, giving him the opening statement at the press conference. Compare that to his treatment of Zelensky in the White House, the tariffs he's whacked on allies like Japan, big tariff on India, won't meet the Australian Prime Minister yet. What did you make of it?
You've laid it out beautifully, Speers. I mean, I know our colleague John said he played him like a Stradivarius violin. It looked more like a kazoo to me. You know, Putin got everything he wanted out of that meeting. He got the legitimacy of a red carpet. He's called a war criminal in other parts of the world. There he is walking freely on American soil. It's gone backwards by the looks of things. Do the Europeans get it back on track now? It's up to them to have to try and find a way through this. So there are lots of big things that have, come off this that have gone wrong. And I think it's actually also just interesting for us. You did mention China, what that does in our region, but it's also an example of how this White House operates, the sort of underlying sense of chaos. These things normally, traditionally, these big set piece meetings, there's a lot of work that goes into those. Historically, the details get sorted out well before the principals get on that tarmac. Doesn't appear to have happened. The prep work wasn't done. You don't go to those things not knowing what the outcome is generally, yet here it is, it's fallen apart.
Yeah, and a point you were making just before we came on air, Clare, Zelensky's going back to the White House. This time he's bringing some friends. By the looks of it, I know a lot of details are still being worked out, but he won't be alone this time when he sits down in the next day or two.
Yeah, well, I think second to the shocking images of Trump clapping as Putin walked on the tarmac overnight, or 2 days ago now, was the scenes in the White House when he met with Zelensky. And if there's to be any kind of progress, particularly from the Ukrainians' point of view, I don't think it would ever have been a good idea for him to go alone again. And I think there's a real issue here where, you talked about Putin doesn't see Zelensky as an equal. I'm not sure that Trump does either.
Two years ago, we had Joe Biden, David, saying I think it's 123 members of the International Criminal Court, if Putin sets foot in your country, arrest him. We have to arrest this guy. Now we've got a US president who's just so outside the orthodoxy, right? But then conversely, in one way, Trump is very, very orthodox. M. Gesson wrote about this in the New York Times this week. Trump, like predecessors Obama and Biden and W. Bush, the primary method with which they're seeking to sort of punish Russia, if you like, or bring them back to the table is through tariffs. And for all of those presidents, it actually hasn't worked.
Yeah, just before we move on, is it worth noting, though, the reality here that Trump is under some pressure from his own base to get out of spending so much money on this war? They're sick of it. And if that means Ukraine having to give up some of its land, this is the cold reality that's behind all of this. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's a big factor. Trump is consistent on one thing. He doesn't want to be involved in wars. He's a peacenik, if you like, on that front. But the problem is that allows a tyrant and a dictator to take advantage of you.
Grab land.
Your credibility is equal to whether you are willing to actually use the big stick or not. And that's the problem.
And all the way through here, Zelensky said, we're not going to cede a single centimetre of Ukrainian land. Now, I don't know how realistic this is, but Trump overnight today has sort of said, well, Ukraine should go further and concede all of the Donbass, not just the bits that they've already lost to Russia. And what planet does Ukraine agree to that?
Let's move on to Palestinian recognition. Clare, it was 3 weeks ago on this program, the Prime Minister said there was no imminent move on recognition. And then on Monday of last week, he did announce that this is something that Australia will be doing at the UN General Assembly in New York, declaring its support for recognising a Palestinian state. What happened? What was behind this?
A few things. I actually think it's less surprising that the announcement came on Monday and more surprising that the Prime Minister said 3 weeks ago that this decision wasn't imminent. As we've subsequently learned, he's been having a lot of conversations with allies, leaders in the UK, Canada, France in particular, who over that period then came out with their own sort of plan to progress recognition by September. So I think in this sense, the confusion is more why the Prime Minister boxed himself in 3 weeks ago, when more than a year ago was when Labor shifted their position on whether recognition was at the end point of a two-state solution, or to now saying if there is a point at which recognition progresses a two-state solution and progresses peace, we will join that momentum. So what's changed is A, they perceive that momentum has been built by those other countries. I think the announcement from the Israeli government, they intend to occupy Gaza. I also just think between now and the UN, the government's got quite a bit on. I mean, Penny Wong and others were away in the Pacific almost immediately after that Palestinian announcement. Logistics might have come into it a bit as well.
And I think the Prime Minister is also pointing very much to the statement from the Arab League states, those neighbouring countries, saying there can be no role for Hamas, that there does need to be reform. It would seem, reading between the lines, recognising the existence of the State of Israel along the way as well. But James, how significant is that statement from the Arab states?
Look, I think it matters immensely because the theory is it's not really clear if there is to be peace, who the peacekeeping force will comprise, but the theory has been that it will have to include at least some Arab states along with, or maybe under the auspices of, the United Nations. That's obviously to be determined. Just one thing I'd add to what Clare said, David, in terms of why now. So I think there's a very clear view from the top of the government down that momentum is building towards this, that Benjamin Netanyahu, as in recognition, Benjamin Netanyahu is increasingly isolated on the world stage. And I think these Western nations falling into line with 140 odd other nations, I think it's as much designed about putting pressure on Donald Trump to say, hey, this has gone far enough, as it is on Netanyahu.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Each of these US allies taking this step, it is about putting pressure on the US. It's not without its risks, though, Jacob. And we saw that during the week. The blowback from, well, certainly Israel, from Netanyahu, from some in the US was stronger than others. Mike Huckabee on 7:30.
Yeah, so Sarah Ferguson interviewed the ambassador. That's the US. I guess you could even say Donald Trump's ambassador to Israel. He's a high-powered player in Republican politics. He's been a governor. His daughter was the president's spokesperson in the first Trump White House. So he is speaking with some knowledge of the way the president sees this. And he used the word disgusted about the Australian recognition or move to recognise a Palestinian state. So that is how that's being perceived. I think we can sort of make that
He also wrongly said, though, didn't he, that there'd been no heads up. Yeah, so there had been a call with Marco Rubio, and obviously the PM spoke to Netanyahu.
Yes, and the government was very quick to point out that they had, as you just said, spoken to Rubio. Huckabee also referred to standing next to Trump, which clearly hasn't happened. As we know, our Prime Minister has not stood next to Donald Trump. So I think he was confused. I think he was talking about Keir Starmer.
And then the reaction from Hamas was also fascinating during the week as well. It has broadly welcomed Australia joining others in this step towards recognition. There was a bit of confusion, though, James. Your paper reported comments from Hamas co-founder Hassan Youssef praising Anthony Albanese's political courage. Hamas then said that, look, they're not accurate. He's been in jail for a couple of years. What happened there?
Look, I think this is more stuff up than conspiracy, right? So obviously the Sheikh's office made those comments. That's a pretty standard thing. The Prime Minister's office, the opposition leader's office, the Hamas founder's office. You kind of, as a journalist, you take that as read. Another element of Hamas said, no, wait, that's not legit. Then another wing of Hamas said, oh, no, wait, actually, well, we pretty much agree with that. It's a very similar statement. I think what it showed is a couple of things, like the way this played out last week. First of all, that the government, despite what it says, is actually quite concerned about perceptions of its decision to move towards recognition. It's sensitive on the topic. Secondly, it just underscores the extent to which Hamas has been decapitated by Israel. So you've got a Gaza wing, you've got a West Bank wing, people in Turkey, like in Istanbul, you've got an organisation.
It's a bit of a mess. I mean, look, this bloke has been in jail, but broadly the sentiment from others in Hamas was, yes, we welcome this step. Is that awkward for the Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, I don't actually think that the government, obviously saying that there will be no role for Hamas is one thing, but I don't think the government necessarily can give the kinds of guarantees that it was giving in the last week. I think when the Prime Minister was pushed on, for example, you want democratic elections to occur in a future Palestinian state, how do you stop Hamas from winning those elections? His response was you stop them from standing, which starts to become a complicated kind of democracy.
Yeah, and it comes back to, can the Arab states put more pressure, certainly than Australia can, to see that happen? Anyway, time to talk to the opposition's Tim Wilson. To take us there, here was Donald Trump and Sean Hannity on Fox News talking about the possible peace deal for Ukraine.
There's going to be some land swaps. There will be more Russian territory than there had been. And what Ukraine wants and needs desperately is our security measures that won't be NATO related. If you had to look into your crystal ball, is that how it ends?
Well, I think those are points that we negotiated, and those are points that we largely have agreed on, actually. I think we've agreed on a lot. And I can tell you, the meeting was a very warm meeting. You know, he's a strong guy.
Tim Wilson, welcome to the program.
Happy Sunday, David.
Happy Sunday. Well, a warm meeting with a strong guy, says Donald Trump. Does it worry you the US president has now adopted the Russian president's position on this?
Well, of course, we're very cautious about what's gone on over the past 24 hours and what's going to come on in the coming days. The reality is there needs to be any sort of arrangement needs to be deeply involved with Kiev and making sure they have genuine agreement in any decision making going forward. We haven't got absolutely clear signals about what it is they're going to do, but we're cautious about it. We're watching it very closely because the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia is not something that we've ever been prepared to tolerate, and anything going forward needs the Ukrainians on board as part of a lasting resolution towards peace.
Yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson, the former British PM, has called this meeting in Alaska just about the most vomit-inducing episode in the tawdry history of international diplomacy. I'm not sure if you're going to use language quite that strong, Tim Wilson, but...
Not on that subject.
Okay,
yes.
But is there any concern for you about a US president adopting the position of Vladimir Putin here when it comes to the future of Ukraine?
Well, all I can say is I hope that the United States does what we would hope for our ally, which is to make sure that it stands up for international peace and security and for the sovereignty of nations.
And do you think that's what Donald Trump is doing?
Well, this is where it comes down to our capacity to be able, as a nation, as Australia, to leverage influence over the United States. Now, after the events of this week, that is less than it was at the start of the week. So it's really important that we maintain an active engagement with the United States, because if we want to make sure the United States is putting its best foot forward and leveraging it to stand up for the best interests of existing borders and genuine engagement.
But surely as a self-respecting sovereign country, we should be able to say we don't think Ukraine should be required to give away a chunk of its territory to Russia.
But this is precisely why I've said we need genuine engagement with Ukraine as part of this process. So that's the engagement the opposition wants. But what part of that is we need to be, as a country, able to leverage our influence over the United States, and that's been weakened this week. And that's part of the price of what happens.
And I'll come to what you're talking about
work with our allies.
But are you saying this means there should be no criticism of Donald Trump from Australia?
I've never said that at all. I mean, a government is well within its right to criticise another government if it disagrees. The most important thing is that we are in a position to be able to influence it successfully, sometimes publicly, sometimes privately.
So are you willing to criticise Donald Trump for walking away from calls for a ceasefire?
Well, I want to make sure we get the best outcome in this solution. I don't think that's going to be resolved by providing a running commentary on the events so far. Okay. They haven't concluded yet. But I can say with absolute clarity that if we don't have a genuine agreement with the participation of the Ukrainian government, that is not going to be a desirable solution from where we sit.
So on the Prime Minister's decision to recognise Palestinian statehood, he argues that joining the UK, France, Canada and others on this will help progress a lasting peace in the Middle East. You obviously disagree with that. What do you think Australia should do then to progress a lasting peace?
Well, we've taken a long-term bipartisan position around a two-state solution based on a series of preconditions that we would expect to be met, like the lasting security and respect for the State of Israel, like making sure Israeli hostages are returned, like making sure there isn't going to be Hamas running any government. We've said about it preconditions, and we've been very public about that. Up until last Monday, that was also the position of the government. Now, what the government has done is essentially thrown that into turmoil by making a commitment to recognise a Palestinian state, but not being able to then say if those preconditions are going to be met, that they're going to back down. There wasn't the engagement with the opposition up until this point. I would have thought that actually having an engagement with the opposition for a lasting policy position from the Australian government would be a sensible way forward. They've chosen not to take that path.
OK, so coming back to the question though, what does the opposition then think should be done right now to move from where we are to a lasting peace in the Middle East?
Well, again, we need the United States clearly as part of any resolution, because they're going to be part of the process through the United Nations. We obviously need Israel to also be a participant as part of that. We don't have either.
Is there anything
of those
Australia
two
can
things.
do? Is there anything Australia can do?
Well, Australia is very limited in what it can do apart from exercise its voice internationally. But again, at the end of the week, we have less influence over some of our allies than we did at the start of the week, because we have made decisions without
So
any
just
real
leave
clear
it to the United
influence.
States. Is that the approach?
That has not been the answer that I've provided. What we've sought to do is to take a position that works with countries like the United States, because they need to be part of the resolution to a long-lasting solution. But instead what we have is a government that has gone and made a series of commitments, and then when it's been put to them, well, if Hamas is a participant, as your guest just said, if Hamas is a participant in a future government, does that mean you're going to renege your support? And they're not prepared to give that. So what they've done is written a blank cheque very clearly to those who are sponsoring terror, and in fact what it's actually doing is providing incentive where Hamas as an organisation uses civilians as part of its propaganda efforts, and it's incentivising more of that conduct into the future, and it will be civilians that will pay the price for that.
Susan Lee once said recognising a Palestinian state would give heart to the ordinary people of Gaza and the West Bank. Was she right?
Well, no one's contesting, and I've said already, that a long-term peaceful solution involves a two-state solution with preconditions being met, and that remains our view.
Do you think it would give heart to the ordinary people?
Well, the question is, if it's under Hamas, where you have a terrorist organisation that has never found a way where they can't put Israeli citizens at risk, Palestinian citizens at risk, diverts aid away to deny their own residents in Gaza in a position of harm or starvation. I don't believe that's going to be the case. That's why those preconditions are there. But of course, what we have...
It wouldn't give them heart.
Well, when you have Hamas as a terrorist organisation denying people food, that doesn't give people heart.
Okay.
That's why we have to make sure that any long-term solution meets these preconditions. Instead, what we have is a government that has given a blank cheque without any expectation that these ultimately are going to be met, David.
OK, let's turn to the Reform Roundtable this week in Canberra. Again, Susan Lee reckons it's all a stitch-up, but your colleague Ted O'Brien has accepted the invitation to attend. Does the Liberal Party have any ideas to bring to the table?
Well, in fact, one of the significant wins out of this roundtable, to the extent there are any, is that the government has caved to our position before the last election in the context of the National Construction Code, which is designed to get more Australians' houses being built. Before the last election, the Labor Party said they opposed our position to pause so that we could get on with building more houses. And today we have an announcement from the Housing Minister that they're going to follow through on the opposition's position. So do we have one? Yes, the government has gone on to deliver it. Okay. We absolutely believe we have other policy positions.
What about
industrial... Sorry?
What are the other
we absolutely
ideas?
Believe that industrial relations should be on the agenda, but the government has specifically
So what would you like
it.
to see, because at the election, the coalition backed Labor on industrial relations largely. What are you suggesting needs to happen on industrial relations now?
Well, as a baseline, we want to have a conversation around simplicity of the system. Because
what does that
right
mean?
right now we have the Labor Party actively seeking to introduce laws where they're undermining workers getting paid more so that they can increase the costs on small business and increase complexity. When I go around the country, David, and talk to the small businesses of this nation, what they tell me consistently is how hard it is to be able to not just employ people, but to pay people. We even have a situation
where... So what's the change you're talking about there? What needs to change?
We even have a situation where the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations can't interpret the laws it's responsible for. So what we want to have a conversation with employers about how we make the system simpler, more straightforward, and introduce harmony into the workplace so people can get paid more and make it easier, because at the moment the unions are actively running around and undermining people getting paid more.
All right, so a conversation on simplifying the laws, but you're not saying wind back multi-employer bargaining, any changes in the gig economy, work from home rights. You're not suggesting rolling back any of Labor's changes, are you?
I'm talking specifically about simplification of the laws, because at the moment you've got the unions actively undermining workers getting paid less because it minimises their chance to be able to go on and clip the ticket and be able to gain advances from that. We literally have a case in the Fair Work Commission right now where the retail industry wants to pay their workers 35% more, and the Labor Party has introduced laws to kneecap that position because it would undermine the influence and power of unions at the expense of workers' pay.
Do you think workers deserve a legally enshrined right to work from home?
Well, we've made it clear that we believe working from home works best when you have employers and employees working together. Now, there's already pre-existing arrangements under federal legislation to give workers a pathway to do so.
Right.
That's a very big difference from what's being proposed in the state of Victoria.
Do you oppose that in Victoria?
Well, we've made it clear that by going down this pathway, it has a number of impacts. The Jacinta Allen has put forward a plan. It excludes nurses, tradies, retail workers, so many different types of workers. She's now talking about excluding all of small business, including people who are on probation, because it was an ill-thought-out political stunt, not one of substance.
So you oppose it?
And that's why everybody's coming to realise how limited it is.
Do you oppose it?
And of course, well, as the federal government has not gone on to commit themselves, because it simply won't work in improving an outcome for Australian workers.
Sounds like you oppose it.
Well, it's something that's in state legislation, and there's been no proposals being put in.
You oppose it, Tim Wilson?
Well, it hasn't been put forward in federal legislation. It's something in state legislation. And the state legislation, the federal legislation already provides provisions to make sure that Australians can work from home, because we support work from home as part of workplace flexibility arrangements.
What about workers and employers negotiating 4-day working weeks at the workplace? Do you have a problem with that?
Well, this is just an ambit claim from the trade union movement. And it is one of these cases, we know it's an ambit claim because only a few months ago, the union shut down a pathway where the retail industry, again, actually applied to introduce a pathway for a 4-day working week. The unions were the one who shut this down. If Sally McManus really believed that this was such a good idea, she would introduce it across all the people who work for trade unions across the countries. She hasn't done that.
Do you have a problem with it if it's done at the workplace level?
Well, our position is that, of course, the government has already ruled this out as
What's your position? If it's done at the workplace level, what's wrong with that?
Well, if employers and employees want to come together and negotiate arrangements that suit them, that's a very different thing from what Sally McManus is proposing, where they're seeking to legislate these sorts of proposals, which they aren't even adopting themselves. That's what workplace flexibility means. It means coming together to get the best outcome for workers and employers to advance economic productivity and improving standards of living for every Australian, David.
On tax, some young Liberals want negative gearing limited to one investment property. Is that something you would ever consider?
Well, I haven't even seen this proposal, but there'll always be proposals thrown out there, David. We took a different position to the last election, and of course we've got policies that are being put forward, but I've never been a believer that this is the fundamental problem around housing. The solution to housing is to get more housing built.
But would you have a problem with limiting negative gearing to one investment property?
Well, I don't think it's a solution to the problem. So,
does that mean you'd oppose it, or you're open to it?
I'd like to see the case for it because I haven't even seen the case for it. The government's already ruled this stuff out, and we took a position in the last election against it because I don't see what the case for it is. The problem around housing affordability and building more housing in this country right now is around the problem of supply.
But
We've
the
got
other
a government
problem
that has
that people like Ken
$10 billion
Henry and others talk about, I mean, Ken Henry calls it the intergenerational bastardry of the tax system. Younger workers having to carry a heavy burden of income tax, while predominantly older, wealthier Australians enjoy the majority of the tax benefits. Allegra Spenders put forward ideas to tackle this as well. Do you agree that's a problem, an intergenerational problem in our tax system?
Well, I think there are a number of challenges with our tax system, one of which is it discourages people going on and getting work because of the high burden on income tax. That's not a new proposition. I've said that many times before. But the way you address this is you've got to have a proper conversation around tax reform. The government has already said out of this week's summit they've ruled out tax reform as part of the conversation. So this is the problem with the approach the government is taking. They're not focused on industrial relations. They're not focused on what they need to do to grow the economic pie and to improve the economic conditions for every Australian. You can't find your courage sitting around a round table. You need to actually put proposals forward, debate them and take the Australia
But in fairness,
Australia
Tim
forward
Wilson,
together.
listening to you this morning, you're not putting forward any tax ideas. Your only industrial relations idea is some simplification. It's not exactly going to fix the problems that we have in the economy.
Well, I'm sorry, Dave. We've just come through an election and we're developing our policy positions. This is a government that's been through 4 years, essentially 4 years. They're now in a position where they
You've been in and out of public life for many years, Tim Wilson.
Sure,
you must have some ideas about how to fix the economy.
I absolutely do, David, but I'm going to work with my colleagues to make sure that we drive them forward as part of a policy package to take to the next election. I'm absolutely committed to making sure we have simplification to make it easier to employ more Australians and to raise standards of living and improve the number of Australians going on to get jobs and well-paid jobs. We've got big challenges coming ahead around challenges like artificial intelligence and making sure that we make workplaces more productive, but also building out the capacity for small businesses to be successful as part of a dynamic economy. So we're going to have these conversations in the coming weeks and months, David, but the most important thing is that when we make decisions, our focus is going to be on how we improve and grow the economic pie for the country, David. It's not going to be focused on what we're going to design the laws to rule things in or out based on whether we're paying off and clipping the ticket for our union mates, which has been the basis that this government has taken for its trade union mates.
OK, final one. You're also reviewing the position on net zero. The coalition signed Australia up to the net zero target. I know you want lower energy prices and greater reliability of supply, but the net zero target, should it stay or should it go? What's your view?
Well, from 2015, when Tony Abbott signed Australia up to the Paris Agreement, it's been a consistent position of the coalition at 4 successive elections to support net zero. The difference is under the Albanese government, they elevated net zero emissions above energy reliability, energy security, economic sovereignty, and of course other considerations like national security.
For your part, do you think net zero should stay or go?
And so my position, David, is we should make sure that we have net zero outages, net zero price increases and net zero emissions, because you need to have things in a position of balance of policy to make sure that we can grow the future of the Australian economy, because that's also the basis of social licence to cut emissions as well. If you don't have net zero outages and net zero price increases, public support for net zero emissions reduction is also going to fray.
All right, Tim Wilson, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
All right, so a bit to explore there, and we've got the roundtable coming up. Starts on Tuesday in Canberra. Let's get back to the panel. Jacob Greber, Clare, Armstrong and James Massola. The roundtable. 2 more sleeps, Jacob.
Can't wait.
Productivity palooza. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've seen the government managing expectations for the weeks leading up to this. Where are we at now? What should we expect to come from these few days of talks?
I think the conventional view is really big change won't come out of it in the short term. Longer term, quite possibly. There'll be the sort of processes that get kicked off. The Treasurer said this is about informing the next 3 budgets through to the next election. On the detail, sounds like we're going to get something on the building code, maybe something on road use.
Just explain that to us. So the construction code, Tim Wilson's right. This is something Peter Dutton took to the election.
So he wanted
the construction code.
He wanted a 10-year freeze, yeah.
Yeah, because it has ballooned.
Oh, it's thousands and thousands of pages. It's got sub documents. It's a beast of a thing. And the industry was saying, slow this down. This is one of the reasons that it costs so much to build anything. Anyone in this country who's doing a renovation or building a home knows exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, so putting a freeze on that, it's hoped would speed up some of the, get rid of some of the bottlenecks in the housing industry. What else? There's talk of the vehicle, not vehicle emission standard, the road user charge to replace fuel excise. But Claire, this is going to take some time. It's not clear they've even settled on the best way to do this yet.
No, so obviously the issue more broadly here is that the tax take on the excise that then, funds roads is reducing as more people have EVs. They're not filling up with traditional fuels. So there needs to be a way to regain that revenue. States have previously been told to go it alone, and then the court said absolutely not. And Jim Chalmers started just before the end of the last term working with states on a process. He has sort of now really talked about, because that was done out in the open in public, it's therefore not a new tax that wasn't taken to the electorate at the election in May. So it seems likely that there will be some form of charge, but you do have to work. It's, as with anything in the Federation, you do have to get all of those jurisdictions on board. So even though it may actually be one of the pieces where there's consensus immediately out of those 3 days, it may just be to do it rather than what it looks like. That could take a lot longer.
Yeah, I'm told it will definitely happen, but it's not going to be 6 months or 12 months or 2 years. It's going to take years to build it out, road user charging. But it is also inevitable. And I don't mind saying I have an EV, and I think it's fair. I mean, we should all... Yeah,
everyone should contribute. Yeah. Is one of the issues here, the question a lot of people...
It's not just EVs, though. I mean, I think the reality is this particular model of collecting revenue was broken well before Elon Musk changed the world on EVs. Cars were getting more efficient, hybrids were coming into the market. The fuel the fuel use was falling, continuing to fall. So even if you didn't have EVs, this thing is broken and needs a fix.
Does anyone know how this works, though? Do you have...
So the Victorian model, until it was struck down by the High Court, you started with a booklet at the start of the year and wrote, I have 7,000 kilometres on the clock. At the end of the year, I've got 9,000 kilometres on the clock, and it was, I think, like 0.02 cents per kilometre. And then you'd send that money to, I guess, Vic Roads, and it was about $400 a year. So it wasn't a massive impost, but it wasn't nothing.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think they'd want a better technological solution nationwide.
The idea of tracking where everyone's driving at every moment clearly has privacy concerns for many as well. Look, a couple of these ideas were in a Treasury submission that our ABC colleague Isabel Rowe got a hold of ahead of the roundtable, and Susan Lee made a point of that.
Today, thank you to good journalism from the ABC, we've got more leaks ahead of the productivity roundtable. And what those leaks suggest is that this whole exercise is being choreographed and that outcomes have already been determined and written up, almost ready to announce. Now that just tells me this whole thing is a stitch-up.
And yes, I only wanted to play that because Susan Lee was praising the good journalism of the ABC. But she was
a stitch-up to deliver a policy the Liberal Party took to the last election.
But this is the thing. I was going to say, she's not criticising the ideas that Treasury is putting forward here as part of this.
It's standard practice. Like 2010, Julia Gillard, or 2011, had an economic summit in Brisbane. And I got leaked to the program then, and it was the same kind of thing. Like these things, much like diplomacy, they're worked out well ahead of time. Everyone says their bit, and then they just agree to sign the document they'd already agreed on.
Yeah, it's not so much a surprise. I was just going to say, it's not so much a surprise that these sorts of things are being worked out. I think what has actually ended up being quite convenient for the government, and maybe this is cynical of me when it comes to some kinds of leaks, but it's really focused the conversation around tangible outcomes that we might see in the next week, which was something that we weren't talking about a week ago. And I think that there was a sense, not just in the team of people working on this roundtable, but across the front bench, that this thing was becoming a bit unwieldy, and expectations, despite all the attempts to tamp them down, were quite high.
Needed something.
So it has given a bit of direction.
Because I think, look, clearly any big move on tax, there'll be people disappointed because we need change now to fix the budget and fix the economy. But any big change on tax is not going to come so soon after an election. It's going to be, possibly possibly not until the next election that we see any tax changes.
David, if I may, just one thing that Tim Wilson said early in that interview that it really struck me. He said that the government should have consulted the opposition on the shift in the position on Palestine. And I immediately was reminded, I was the Indonesia correspondent at the time, that Scott Morrison moved Australia's embassy, or said that we would move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which, you know, the opposition was outraged about and other people were outraged. There was no consultation done then, and I would have thought, you know, what's good for goose is good for gander.
Yeah, no, fair point, fair point. Back to the roundtable though, artificial intelligence will also be a big session, and I think this is something that, you know, at least this roundtable has forced a debate around it. And there's a lot of excitement on the part of businesses about the huge potentials, the transformative changes that are already starting to come and will accelerate, and the huge productivity gains. There's anxiety, I think, amongst a lot of Australians about what this all means. Still trying to keep up with what's actually going on. Where is AI being used? Will my job survive all of this as well? Jacob, what can we expect to be discussed at the roundtable when it comes to AI?
So there's a push by the union movement to give workers a say in the adoption of AI. Now, business is very nervous about that. That's a bit like farriers getting the right to oppose the wheel. And the introduction of the Model T Ford, that's a red line, I'm told, for business that they will not cross. But at the same time, you're right, there's a lot of anxiety around this. It's one of the reasons this summit is not called the Productivity Summit, it's called the Economic Summit. The government realised that most people, when they hear that word productivity, think, that means I'm going to get sort of done over here by my boss and I'll have to work harder and longer, which isn't actually what productivity growth's about, but they've rebadged it for that reason. AI is at the centre of this, David. I mean, who knows? The ABC might replace all of us one day with avatars. Now, I'll look a lot younger, and you'll be much more handsome than you are now.
Exactly.
But like, there are anxieties here.
It won't be all bad. But this is the thing. It's amazing when you start fiddling around with some of these AI tools, what they can do already. It blows your mind. But then to think where this is going, it does get a little scary for some, exciting for others. The Australian government, as far as my conversations, what I've picked up, at the moment, there does seem to be a growing consensus around, look, we shouldn't get in the way of this too much, use existing regulations, tweak them where necessary to deal with some of the issues that arise. But they're also eyeing off what could be a big win for Australia, and that is a farm of data centres somewhere in Australia where we have the land mass and the renewable potential to power AI for the world.
Yeah, I don't think there's actually consensus across the government on what to do with AI here. Ed Husic, as Industry and Science Minister last term, spent a huge amount of time working toward what was ostensibly going to look like an entirely dedicated AI Act to regulate this space. And I think there's a lot of talk about capturing the opportunities of AI and that how this is going to be really beneficial for a lot of people. But I would look at the .com booms and the introduction of the internet. Australia doesn't have a Silicon Valley. So it's great to say that AI is a big opportunity, but if you're not making decisions, not just on the positive in terms of investment, but also guardrails, then it's entirely possible that AI will be the future, but it might not be ours.
I think part of the problem is that because of that, a lot of the tech companies are in the United States. What can Australia do when it comes to these guardrails? I mean, we've got a lot of debate around protecting our creative content, and fair enough. But ultimately, where people are going to be using this stuff, and can Australia really stop that happening?
Yeah. To follow up on Clare's point, to answer your question, Ed Husic has spent 2 years working on, or he did spend 2 years working on this kind of idea of regulating, placing guardrails. But within the government, there is a counter view. Jim Chalmers, Tim Ayres, the minister who replaced Ed Husic, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, a Victorian senator, they're very much like light touch, let Europe go first, let America go first. And I actually think there's some merit to that as well, in that Europe is an economy of 500 million people.
James, if anyone's wondering what your T-shirt is this morning, this is the moment to reveal your Skynet,
the Skynet
fans of the Terminator.
Just on what Australia can do, though, there are 4 or 5 now states in the United States who are introducing age verification laws at the app level. Europe is moving toward age verification. So in terms of what can Australia do when none of those tech companies are domiciled here, it turns out a fair bit.
Yeah, we can just ape those policies. That's what I think the smartest.
And I think there is a proper debate to be had about intellectual property. We're technology takers on AI. We're not at the forefront. It's a capital hungry monster that only the big players can really play in. So we get their stuff. The question is, do they get to mine our cultural goods for free without any sort of barrier? I think that's a legitimate
This is
conversation.
the big debate for me. Malcolm Knox had a great piece in the Herald the other day, if you'll forgive the plug, an open letter to Scott Farquharson, is that how you say it?
Farquhar, yeah.
About Farquhar, thank you, about intellectual property and this whole push that AI should just have unfettered access, what that means for creatives in Australia, for journalism in Australia, for also, medical researchers. That's what we're not talking about enough, I think.
It's a really difficult part of this. Look, just quickly on the 4-day working week, grabbed a lot of headlines during the weekend. Look, plenty of people quite like the idea of only working 4 days.
I wouldn't mind a 6-day and 23-hour work week myself, rather than 24/7. I'm not going to give a running commentary on all of them, but certainly the government has no plans.
Yeah, well, poor old Prime Minister does work pretty hard. But ultimately, what is the ACTU talking about here?
What they're more talking about is, they're opening the Overton window. They're saying this is something that we should be talking about. Employers generally hate it, but it's worth pointing out, your Bunnings, your Lever and Kitchen, it is actually being trialled at some big companies. There's not a lot of solid academic research on whether it's actually good or not, but why not have the conversation? And as a rich nation, why shouldn't we be aspiring to a 4-day week?
I think the French tried a 35-hour week and went backwards after they realised it wasn't working.
The problem becomes over time as well, the idea that you get this boost of productivity because people who are used to working 5 days a week now work 4. Well, you then have a generation, essentially, I assume, who becomes used to having a 4-day week. So is there that subconscious drive to be more productive? There's not really the longitudinal studies to show that.
The evidence around that is the evidence around that proposition, which the union Sally McManus was pushing forward, is quite disputed as to whether that's really how productivity works
Broadly
at the
as well,
individual
though.
level.
There's 2 studies into it. Neither of them are sort of robust academic studies, to be honest.
Richard Holden did quite a. It's worth reading what Professor Richard Holden thought about all of that. Definitely not a fan.
On the politics, it's a bit of a red herring anyway. The government says you can already do this at an employer level in EBA negotiations. So I think
go for it at the workplace.
Yeah.
And are we talking 40 hours, like 4 days by 10 hours, or are we talking 4 8 hours? I don't know.
That's for them to negotiate at the workplace level. All right, our panel, James Massola, Clare, Armstrong, Jacob Greber, back in a moment with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with writer and EP extraordinaire for the ABC, the one and only Zoe Norton Lodge, and a very warm welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
It's relentlessly bad news out of the Middle East, Zoe. The government has said it's going to recognise a Palestinian state, even though the state it's in is not very good.
Yeah, sure does.
Harry Bruce, we will recognise Palestine?
Well, it's still recognisable. I mean, is it recognisable?
No. Cartoons really do cut right straight through to the heart of the matter, don't they?
They really do.
Fiona Katauskas has picked up on this beautifully. Recognition and beyond recognition. It's welcome to Gaza, Palestinian statehood.
Yeah.
Kathy Wilcox picked up on the terrible toll. 242 journalists have been killed in Palestine, and they're all Palestinian journalists, of course, because no foreign press can get in. Why did you kill them?
Because he was Hamas.
How do you know he was Hamas?
Because we killed him.
Yeah, which is this circular argument that seems to go on.
Yeah.
Absolutely awful. Interest rate rises used to be something you could bank on, and now the RBA's decided to bring them down. And Michelle Bullock, the RBA governor, has quit dragging her feet.
Oh, little wordplay. I like that, Mike.
Lovely Mark Knight cartoon. The Inflation Dragon. It's good to see him again.
It is nice to see him. And frankly, I have not seen anything that red-faced and passed out since Barnaby Joyce. So.
I don't think the mortgage payers care, really, who's just bring it down.
Yeah, exactly. Was it you? Was it you? I am not thinking about that.
No.
I'm just thinking about, can I buy some food?
Warren Brown has got RBA governor here, Michelle, popping the cork.
Yes.
I wonder if she's going to do a shoey if it drops again.
Oh.
Would you like to see that?
I would
At the press conference?
I would love to see her do a shoey. I mean, look, she's halfway there. She is attempting to pour champagne into a wine glass.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, someone didn't go to finishing school, did they? It's not how we do it.
I did love this Glenn Lever, definitely under the thumb. I think it moved, which is just perfect.
It's so good. It's really giving me like Monty Python vibes,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it? Like,
yeah.
and now for something completely different,
Yeah.
a very small interest rate cut.
So we've all heard of the Knights of the Round Table. Well, this week there's going to be days of it as the Productivity Roundtable kicks off in Canberra, hosted by Jim.
Oh gosh, it doesn't look like quite as much fun as the fun fair that is in this cartoon, does it? I'm not sure it'll be so enjoyable.
No, I know. This is the Productivity wheel.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, with cost of living though, it is quite expensive to buy a vowel these days, so nightmare.
Lovely David Pope cartoon. The Prime Minister here has got the round table, and I think he's going to use AI to mow it with the Jim Chalmers AI mower.
I mean, there is a lot to unpack in this particular image, isn't it? I feel like I'm having the same fever dream that Jim Chalmers might be having in this little thought bubble.
Managing the garden of expectations.
Before you begin, tap to have your AI mower map your round table.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice he let Chalmers go to Nimbin, I guess.
How to boost your productivity with Kathy Wilcox.
Profits down, workers slacking off, you need a productivity stick.
Lack the imagination to innovate? You need an IP sucker to monetize other people's genius. Yep, scraping your content. It doesn't sound good, does it?
No, I mean, to be honest though, monetizing other people's genius, like, is that what we're doing on Talking Pictures?
I think so. Taxes eating a hole in your company's profits. After all that whacking and sucking, you need a tax break.
Remember, productivity is all about making more with less, just like when your workers have to water down their soup.
I know, which is where it comes to really in the end. I think you could have an AI host of Talking Pictures.
Oh yeah, you can be replaced. We can make a hologram.
I love Peter Brolman's cartoon, who seems to think the zest is history.
Yes. Oh, you love it.
Low-level fruit will be a priority, says the Prime Minister talking to the media.
Yes.
As Jim's sitting at the Productivity Roundtable.
I wonder if they're just going to try to plug the holes in the budget with a giant lemonade stand situation.
Yeah, you've got lemon, make lemonade.
Yeah.
Mate, it's been a pleasure unpicking events this week with you. I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. James.
David, you actually touched on this in your interview with Tim Wilson. I've been going back through an old Susan Lee speech. She's been a long-time supporter of Palestine, a recognition of Palestine, a co-chair of the Friends of Palestine in Parliament. She's really moved in terms of where her position was 10 years ago to now. So in 2011, she was saying things in Parliament like, the Palestinian case comes, for recognition comes with no threat of violence. She talks about meeting the World Vision's foster child she sponsored in Palestine. And she says, as you mentioned, that, doing this would give heart recognition to the ordinary people of Israel. So that's all fine. I'm not making a comment on that either way. What I think she's in danger of, Malcolm Turnbull did something very similar in seeking to always appease the right of the Liberal Party, and she's in danger of belying who she is as a leader if she goes much further, basically.
Interesting observation. Claire.
A community organisation called Amplify did a bit of cheeky polling last week on people's perceptions of the round table next week. They found 63% of people actually think that productivity means they have to do more work and their boss gets all the benefit. Now, Jim Chalmers, in an interview to me over the weekend, said he agreed that productivity is a, quote, soulless word. So this is my pitch to retire it and come up with a better way to engage the community on what we're actually talking about here. If it means less time in traffic, let's say that. If it means that you'll get more out of your day with less input, let's say that.
Yeah, like we should get AI to come up with
it. How do you make productivity fun? Jacob.
The risk of stealing offsiders' thunder. How about the Wallabies last night? If they can win, in Johannesburg at altitude, surely next week's round table can deliver a big win as well. The political class need to channel those Wallabies and come up with something good.
It's that crossover at this point of the Sunday morning that works the best. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Now, finally, if things do get a little boring at this week's roundtable, they could always turn to the Shadow Treasurer for some entertainment. It's not quite up there with Craig Emerson's No Whyalla Wipeout, but Ted O'Brien is making a start here. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Who can take your money, fritter it away, saddle you with debt that you can never repay? The Treasurer can. Oh, the Treasurer can.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.